Well, welcome back to another podcast from the Miles Driven. This time, I'm going to focus the podcast around a recent question that came into the channel on the main channel. Someone asking about dealer discounts. This will be a slightly shorter podcast. We've got a long podcast coming next week because Owen is coming back, and we're going to be discussing the generations of the GTI. So if that sounds interesting, do stick around and watch that one. But on this episode, I'm just going to read out the question. So we're having a discussion, myself and the person commenting about one of the vehicles, and they asked just a really insightful question about halfway through this back and forth. And it was, do dealers decide prices and discounts? Or, in this case, we were talking about a Mercedes. So they said, or does Mercedes dictate to all in specific territories? So essentially, are discounts coming just from the dealer end when you walk in to the dealership to buy a new car? Is it just a dealer decision? Is Mercedes head office, in this case, we were talking about Mercedes, but is any manufacturer the one behind the covers somewhere sort of saying, yes, you can give up to this amount off? And it's actually a really fascinating area. And I thought, because so many people are interested in trying to get a discount when they buy a new car or a used car, but also how this system works, because I think it's a little bit of a sort of behind the curtain type thing. And people, once you know it, once you understand it, you can negotiate much more strongly, and also be sort of fair when someone says to you, we can't do that. You understand they're not just saying it, and sometimes you understand when they are just saying it. So hopefully that will become clear by the end of this. But the answer in a nutshell, and I put this as the response in the comment, and I said I would expand it a bit out on the next podcast episode, is it's both. Both a manufacturer and a dealer can give you a discount off a car, but it works in very different ways, and there's very, very different reasons as to why one would give you a discount and another wouldn't. So let's just talk about the manufacturer for a moment. So if we just have a fictional manufacturer and they make 6 different cars on 3 different lines, okay? So this is quite common. You can't generally have multiple cars that have different platforms beneath them on the same line. It's possible. It's just not as efficient, because if you imagine a car when it's being built is essentially going down, it isn't, but if you imagine it this way, it's going down a train track. Okay, so it can't come off the train track. It has to follow it from stop A to stop B. It can't sort of move off in the middle. Now, in reality, there are ways that manufacturers do this. That's how they give you very, very special cars. They'll say 50, for example, have been taken off of the factory floor. So that means we've made the shells, we've done it on the regular line, and then we've removed some of them, and they've then gone to a special finishing area. That's what would happen, for example, when they used to make special AMG versions, the AMG Black series, for example, of a Mercedes. Think of it the same for BMW CS to an extent, or possibly not anymore, but that's what they would used to do. They would build it to a certain point with all the other M3s and M4s, and then it would get to a certain point in the line, and they would actually remove it from the line and then finish it off, usually by hand. There are some ways you could do it otherwise. But in your little factory, you've got your 3 runs, and you build 2 cars off of one platform. A platform is just the chassis underneath. And they're your smaller cars. Then you've got your mid-sized cars. They go on line 2, and then line 3, that's your big SUV and your big sort of luxury car that you sell. Okay. And your foreman comes to you one day and he says, look, we're doing fantastically on line 2 and line 3. We actually are at full capacity. We can't build any more on those 2 lines. But we do have a problem in that line 1 that builds our smaller car, it's not at capacity. It's only really sort of 70% utilized. And that means we've got machines hanging around, not doing anything for certain portions of the day. It means that the workers on that line are not being fully utilized. And this does step across the geography of how people build cars. Because, for example, I'm saying in one factory, but you can imagine if you build 2 lines in your home country, but the first line, the smaller car, you actually build in a different country, and you build it there because there's, say, a tariff you're trying to avoid, or there's a deal that you're getting because you're building cars there, but you need to keep people employed. You can't start sacking people there because they're not doing anything because you're not selling enough cars. All of this means you need to find a way to utilize that first line, that one with the smaller platform beneath it. And so you'll go to your accountants and you'll say, okay, look, these 2 smaller cars, What's the sort of profit that we have across them, and what can we comfortably take out without us selling them at a loss? And they'll give a figure. Now, of course, you probably wouldn't want to hand off all of your profit. That's how you go bankrupt. So you would take a portion of whatever that number is. Let's just say you can build the car for 15,000 euros, and the sale price, the retail price on the forecourt to a customer is 30,000 euros. And the dealer you sell to is usually around the 25,000 euro marker. So your sort of gap in the middle is around 10,000 euros. But of course, that's not pure profit. You know, you've got to pay out for warranties, you've got to pay all the staff and everything else. So, you know, it's 15,000 to build it. Then you've got 10,000 of gross profit with lots to come out. And you do the maths and you say, look, we could take 5,000 euros off of the sale price and we could still comfortably be in a marginal profit, and it would get that line moving again. What you would do is then you go to all of your dealerships and you say, good news, we're running a promotion. You wouldn't say the exact reasons because there can be some others, which I'll go into in a second. But you'd say, look, we're going to take 5,000 euros off. You know, no one's got to do anything for it. Usually, in fact, almost always, it will be linked to you using the finance with the dealership. Okay, so the main reason a manufacturer will do that is you've just wiped out £5,000 of profit, 5,000 euros, sorry, of profit in our example. So what you may want to do is say, well, we can make some of that back through selling finance because, of course, there's an interest rate. And whether you're financing it through an in-house finance team or through a third-party bank, there will be some money that you can make back. So yes, you've taken a big hit, and you know your investors are not going to be very happy that you're not making as much money from a particular car. But you can say, but we are, you know, we've increased our profits in other areas, and hopefully you can sort of try and squeeze the difference as much as possible, whilst also still having utilization of the line. And so you would go to dealers and say, if someone takes our finance deal or our leasing deal, you can give them 5,000 off from us. Okay, and you'll usually see this as a deposit contribution. Very, very common that's seen. So it's less of a direct discount. It's attached to you getting through the actual finance system. They're taking 5,000 off on their end. So that's a well managed way of doing it. You don't always do it that way. It may be a case that, for example, you have gone to a leasing firm that you're very familiar with, and you said, look, we've only got 2 years left of making this car. People aren't really buying it anymore because it's near the end of its life and they know that. Would you be interested in taking a set batch off of our hands, and we can sort of deal between us? And in that case, they would then offer those leasing companies a deals, and those leasing companies would then be able to offer a cheaper price to end customers. Now, another reason a manufacturer may want to offer a discount, even if the lines are at 100% utilization, quite much rarer if they're at 100%, but if we say 90-95% heavily utilized, if a competitor is coming out with a particularly strong discount because maybe they're in the situation we've just described, well, in that case, you may want to react to that. People don't necessarily increase in the amount of buyers that are out there. So just because you're offering a lower price, and this is talked about in economics a lot, the number of potential customers that you will have a maximum limit. Now, there is then a step from that, so the next step down, where that number of customers will have a maximum limit. So if we say, for example, very nice chocolates, we all like chocolates, the most expensive sort of Swiss, really nice presented chocolates are, say, 50 euros for a box. There'll be a maximum number of people that, even if they got a pay rise and won the lottery and everything else in life, they don't want to spend £50 on chocolates. They just don't, or 50 euros. So they just don't see the value in it that much. But they would be willing to spend 30 euros. So their sort of maximum capacity ends at 30 euros. So the 50 euro chocolate maker was to discount to 30. They've expanded their market. But if they were to discount to 40, they still haven't reached the maximum market of the next batch down. And there'll be some people that won't pay more than 10. Some people don't really like chocolate and they won't pay more than 2. And of course, that's then not your market. And this is quite common within the car market, that some people don't want to buy a new car. For whatever reason, there's lots of reasons, but some people will say, no, not interested in a new car. You could give it to me for free and I wouldn't buy it. I wouldn't take it off your hands. Funny enough, that was one of my old, he was our showroom manager. He used to say that. He used to say, "There's a price for everyone. You've just got to figure it out and lift it up." That was his motto. Because ultimately, if you said to someone, "Look, we'll sell it to you for a €1," they'd say, "Oh yeah, well, for €1, that's a car. I'd definitely buy it." So that's it. You just got to move them up to €15,000, which is a challenge. Other reasons why manufacturer, so there's competition. So they want to, they don't want to lose sales to someone else giving a discount. There's them trying to maximize utilization. There's also, if they know they're going to be moving from one engine or one powertrain or one trim specification to a different one, then they may want to finalize and remove the last that they have on offer. So for example, if you're facelifting a car, and I've mentioned previously that I've done this when I sold cars, if you've hit the cap, the limit as to how far you can sell a car into. So manufacturers will generally say, okay, you can't sell the pre-facelift car after, and then they will have a cut-off date. Now, very rare you would reach that cut-off date, because most of the time you would have already sold all the ones you had, because they've stopped sending them to you because they've changed the factory line over to sell the updated car. But it happens sometimes, and it happened to the dealership I was at once, where we had a regular sort of low specification saloon car. It was not in the best of colors. It didn't have any specification added to it at all, and it had the least desirable engine. So it sort of had a lot going against it. Not quite sure how we had ended up with it, to be honest. It might have just been the sales manager had to put in that sometimes you'll get a minimum order for a trim specification. It might have been that. It could have been anything. Maybe he thought it would sell and he was wrong. That's happened many a time. But we had it, and it had gone past its 90-day interest-free period. I'll get onto that in just a moment when we talk about dealers. But then the manufacturer had said to us, it needs to be, I think we had until the 1st of March that year, which was when the next number plate in the UK was coming out. And from the 1st of February, I think it's actually the 1st of January, the factory had switched over entirely. So in some countries, the latest one was already out and on the street, and they just didn't want to see the old one registered. So we had to pre-register it, which we did on the very last day that we could. So it means we, the dealership, buy it from the manufacturer, and then we offered it at a discount. But in that case, we had bought the car at a substantial discount, because, again, manufacturers, if it's like anything, if things are running down a line, you can't just sort of say stop the presses and pull a lever and everything stops. It has to be done in a measured way. And if you are building cars, you want to have a plan in place. Would be a good person to speak to about this when he's on the podcast next, because he's obviously worked in product planning. But they would have a point where they would say, yes, that's the point where we're going to have our cut-off and our changeover. But there can be loads of things that affect that date. And bearing in mind that every car that's ever built today, I'm trying to think if there's any exceptions. Koenigsegg, maybe. No, I think they have some. So there's third parties basically are selling into manufacturers. So even Koenigsegg, even though they build a lot of their own stuff, I'm sure part of the ECU or something will come from a third party supplier, the windscreen, the glass, things like that. They don't, it's very unlikely they make the glass, for example. They could be, but unlikely. And that's the case of, if you've committed to buy a certain amount off of a third party, you're not going to just waste it. You're going to build all those cars, and that may just drag your deadline slightly. So once they've gone and they've built, you'll say to the dealerships, okay, we're willing to offer 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 just to get these gone. So that's a promotion you can offer to final customers. The only other time that manufacturers usually get involved, there's going to be, I'm sure, a couple of other exceptions, but the only other time that I've seen it is when a regulation change is coming, and the car that you have, or the car that is trying to be sold, needs to be sold soon, because it can't pass the next set of regulations, which means it'll have to be registered if it's already built at a loss to the dealership. And the dealerships will come together as a group and they'll say, we're not taking the hit on this. You, the manufacturer, built it. We need some support. It's quite a friendly conversation. It sounds more sort of a conflict than it is. It's just a reasonable conversation. So that happened to me at the dealership I was at. We were selling the very last of the Mazda RX-8. It only had, I think it was a month left that it could be sold. It might have been 2 months, but we had one left in the showroom. It was in the center of the showroom, and we had a discount of £8,500 before you even asked for a discount. That was how heavy the discount, because if it had gone another month and a half, I think it was, we would have had to register it ourselves. We couldn't take the risk on it not being sellable. And so we had support from Mazda. They said, look, yeah, we understand in the UK, the regulation is changing. So, to shift the last ones that you have, we will offer this deposit contribution if someone finances with us. So that was offered. And then we offered another, I think something like £3,000 off. It was a huge, huge discount because we had to sell the car. We had to move it on. So there's an example of both the dealer and the manufacturer getting involved. But that's really where manufacturers sort of end their discounts. Most of the time they want to sell it at the full price because they're taking all of the risk on their side, in that if they build a batch of 10,000 cars, once they decide they're going to release a car, they start building it. There's very few manufacturers, maybe Ferrari, Pagani, Lamborghini maybe, can sit around and just wait for orders to come in. It's why you see a lot of supercar manufacturers, they'll build limited numbers and they'll fill the order books, and then when it hits the press, you'll hear people say they've already been ordered and sold. So basically they wanted to make sure they had a commitment before they started building extremely expensive cars. That doesn't happen so much. Toyota, if they're going to release the new Corolla, they don't wait for people to order them. They'll just build it and they'll confidently go ahead. And if they get their market right and they sell the right car, then they should be able to start at 100% capacity in day one and start making their money from all their research and development back over the period of time of the car's life, and then reach a point of profit and go on, and that will then fund the next car and so forth and so on. Now we'll switch over to the dealer side, and the dealer side is quite an interesting probably not actually as interesting as the manufacturer side, but I want you to imagine that you're a sales manager for a moment, and you have to, your job is to sell cars through your salespeople. You'll have a target that you need to hit each month. You'll have a quarterly target, you'll have a half-year target, and a full-year target. Some places can have chassis targets over a longer period, but I've never worked anywhere that did that. So I think that's more at the very, very high end. You could have someone. It's a bit like selling houses, isn't it? If it's going to take longer for a sale to conclude, because a car's got to be hand built somewhere and then shipped and then delivered, and then there's a relationship that needs to be kept, and everything else, then it could be longer. But for the most part, you'll have that monthly target, quarterly target. Some then just have yearly targets as sort of the yearly bonus. A lot have a 6-monthly target. And you're sat there in your sales office and you need to shift, let's just say 30 brand new cars that month and 50 used cars that month. Now, selling 50 used cars, you are not going to have really any support from the manufacturer side at all. Very, very occasionally you may have it where, for example, if a car has been under 3 months old, to help move previous demonstrators or pre-registered cars, sometimes they'll get a finance offer or something like that, just to help sell those cars that really are essentially brand new cars, but needed to sort of shift units. But most of the time, if it's used, it's used. This is the simplest discount that a dealer can ever offer you. There'll be an amount they bought the car for. There'll be an amount that they've had to spend on the car to bring it up to what you'd say retail standard. There'll be a cost of a warranty to go on top of that. There'll be a minimum warranty amount they have to give, and they might put more than that. But even if you're buying, for example, from BMW, and it's a 12-month BMW warranty that's given, the dealer still has to buy that warranty. They don't. I know it sounds funny because you're going to go back to them and get them to do the work if you have a problem, but they have to still purchase that warranty from usually like the after sales at the side of the manufacturer, and then they have coverage through their dealership to do work with the manufacturer paying them. So that's a little bit of behind the scenes. But you've got you've got the car itself, the prep, the warranty that needs to be put on into it, and then you'll have any sort of smaller costs that may be associated with the car. So this could be if it's need extra cleaning, if it's been sort of damaged on the pitch. That does happen. People are moving cars around all the time. People are cleaning cars. Sometimes, a car gets dinged and sometimes people don't even notice. And I've seen it happen, on a pitch a million times. It's just unfortunately the way it is. You've got lots of cars around, and you'll walk past the car one day and say, there wasn't a scratch on that car the other day, was there? And, who's got to face the bill? It's the dealer. So you'll have a sort of incidentals. Then between that number and the sale number, you'll have tax that you have to pay on the profit. And then there may be, within that profit, you may have to then send some of that directly back to your head office. So it's still profit that you've made, but usually the head office, because if you imagine a head office sits there, it doesn't actually make profit itself. It's separate. If you've got one head office of, say, 30 people and they have a dealer group of 100 dealers, that small head office needs to have its lights paid for and everything else. And so you would take a little bit of the profit out and send it to the head office so that their costs are covered. Just as a general aside, profit for a dealership is generally, not all the time, but generally made in the gap that you then have left over, which is any profit left in the sale of a car. Servicing generally pays to keep the lights on. Okay, so all the profit you make from servicing cars, repairing cars, is generally covering salaries, lights, maintenance of the building, rent, all that sort of stuff. So this is ultimately where the business makes money. And to get a deal done, a sales manager will look at that profit, and they will usually have two targets. One of those targets is going to be profit, which will either be a number or a percentage. Generally speaking, it's a number, which is why if the car is a more expensive, larger car that has more profit in it, you're more likely to get a discount than you are on that sort of tiny Super Mini that's priced pretty aggressively online. One thing I would say for dealers over the last 25 years, you could probably step to 30 years. So when I first entered the dealership, I was sort of working with the people that had been around sort of 30 years ago, and they had explained 15 years ago how different it was. It was nearly 20 years ago that I first went into the automotive trade, and they all lamented the days of old when you used to place a advert in a magazine or in a weekly newspaper or something, because you could then essentially price the car at what you thought was about right according to the cap book or the blue book or whatever it's called where you are. And then someone would come in and, you would have a little discussion, and there would be a conversation about a discount, and you'd have some sort of offer you could make. Maybe you were just offering a discount to match someone else. Now we live in the world of, there are price comparison sites, there are websites just set up to show the cheapest used cars on sale, and there are a lot of sort of online used sellers and search engines for used cars. And most of those mean that it's not possible really to sell a car with anything more than the standard industry profit. So it caps the top end for a dealer. And so I had it loads of times when people would say, oh, I know you've got more money in it than that. And you say, I honestly haven't. And to give you an example, had someone once, we had about £1,000 profit in a car. That was prior to tax. I always saw profit prior to tax. That was sorted out of head office. So probably would have been about £800. They wanted £2,000 off the price of the car. I explained it wasn't possible. I then got very, very rare that I did this, but I was a bit keen to sell them a car because I needed to hit my target. They seemed fairly reasonable. They just thought I was lying, I think. And we went through the costs together, and I had the book, and I was like, okay, so we bought the car at, 8,000. We've spent 1,200 on it, and we're selling it to you at 10.5. So once you take the additional costs out, there you go. There's £800. And they'd be like, oh, okay, can I have £800 off? And I was like, no, you can't. We ended up taking some money off, but at least they understood. And again, we wouldn't really ever have done that, which is why it sticks in my memory. But it was just one of those where we had the paperwork and we could prove that, look, this is what we've spent, but you wouldn't generally do that. There's being transparent and there's laying your whole business plan in front of someone, and the latter is not really what you do. So from my point, I think it is quite common that used car sellers are being quite genuine when they say, I just can't do that. And then they'll come out with a much lower figure. Sometimes, of course, they want to maximize their profit and they may just say, that's all I can do. But that's a used sale. Okay. So you've got the amount you bought it for, all your costs, then your tax, then you've got your top figure. There's a gap between those. And if your sales manager is particularly keen to hit his quarterly target, his monthly target, his yearly target, whatever it is, then he may say to his sales staff, yes, I'm going to take a loss on that car because I want to hit my bonus, and the overall profit for the dealer is still above a waterline. So most sales managers will have a waterline, and that's their sort of, you need to get your head above the water, basically. So that's the losses that you could make on trades, the losses that you could make through giving discounts, and then the profit numbers have to stack up to be higher than the waterline number. And if I've had it before where a sales manager, he'd hit his targets for profit, but he was about 2 or 3 sales off for the month, and he could take quite heavy discounts on cars. And I remember he just turned to me once and he said, look, if there's someone, and you think you can push them over the edge with a discount, just tell me how much. Even if it's a loss, I'll do it. Because he wanted to hit his bonus, and of course I want to hit my bonus. But salespeople are generally paid their used sales. They're given a unit amount, but it's usually on profit that they'll earn their money. So you're not that keen to do heavily discounted deals, because with all the time you spend, you're on way less than minimum wage for the amount of work you put into doing that. So it's only if you're also hitting a target. That's all to the side. That's used cars. Hopefully it explains a little bit of the inside line. But new cars, this is where it's quite interesting for a dealership. So I've told you about the manufacturer incentive. There will be a profit margin for a dealership, and it is, again, it's down to your general manager, your sales manager. Salespeople, if they've been around for a little while, will generally have sort of a trusted amount that they can move a vehicle by. It was quite frustrating, actually, if you're a salesperson, always having to go back to your manager because you haven't got the authority to give money off a car. So I particularly liked one of the dealerships I worked at where the sales manager just sort of said, look, if it's, I think it was something like 3%, and it was a car that is not tight on its profit margin, then you can take 3%. And so, on a £30,000 car, that was £900 off, which could, would be enough a lot of the time. A lot of the time you could sort of say, look, what about if we do a free warranty or something that was, a certain cost, and then maybe a couple of £100 off, and people could find that reasonable. And you could do that just at the desk without having to run backwards and forwards. Now, what a sales manager is balancing out on a brand new car is they'll likely have their unit target, and they'll have their quarterly target from the manufacturer, and then they'll have their profit target from the dealer. So there's several things going on here. I do feel for sales managers a bit because they're balancing two ends of a seesaw. So if you imagine on one side, you've got the target for a quarterly target, and this will pay you a bonus from the manufacturer. So let's say, for example, you sell 100 new cars in a 3-month period, you're going to get, just as a very basic example, a £100,000 bonus paid to the dealership. So what some dealers will do is they'll aim only to hit that target. So they will offer all the money off. They'll take a loss on cars because they know as long as they hit the number 100, they will get £100,000 in our example, paid from the manufacturer to them as a bonus for selling so many units. And that then sort of replaces the profit they would have made on cars. That's not a very wise way to do it. And I say that only because I've seen pretty much every single dealership group that did that. I don't think any of them are still standing. Maybe one or two, but I just can't think of any. But what I would say is, so that's one way of doing it. And especially once you get towards the end of a quarter, a dealership may try to do some balancing there and say, you know what, I know we've got the bonus coming up. We're only 5 units off. We can offer some big discounts. And that would happen sometimes in that example I gave you. Someone says, well, someone else is offering the car at X price. And you'd be like, that is at a loss. I know it's at a loss because I know I can't do that. But you'd always go and speak to your sales manager. You speak to the general manager and say, look, we're 5 units off getting the larger bonus. Maybe we just take a hit on this one, knowing that, it will take us towards the bonus. The reason, by the way, this was not a very good business plan. Deals sometimes just fall out of bed. So you've sold 105 cars and 7 cars, people don't collect them on time. They don't make it on transit. I had a car once that got damaged in transit and was unsellable. People's finance doesn't go through. People's circumstances change. And all of a sudden, you've sold 98 cars, not 100. You sold 105, but only 98 were delivered. So you missed your bonus. And that's it. Dealership's out of business because you made a loss on selling them all. And then you didn't get your bonus. So you're out of business. Same goes for if you offer too aggressive discounts all the time. Every business operates off profit. And so, yes, sales manager will have that in mind, but let's just say it's the first week of a new quarter. Really, you're not thinking so much of the quarterly target, but you are thinking of the monthly target. Let's just say that's 30 cars. There will be a margin that a dealership can take off, but they're not always going to give it away. Usually what it would be down to is this a car that we think we can sell without a discount to someone else? So if you walked in, for example, to Audi today, and you were looking to buy the brand new Audi A5 that's come out a year ago, that car on its own should be desirable enough to find buyers because it's a recent vehicle to be sold. And the manufacturer themselves may offer some money off. So you're going to be a bit reluctant to take money off. You may do, but knowing that it takes a while to build a car and to send it to you, and people do like to just buy a car off the forecourt. They will order them sometimes, but it's better to have them on the forecourt. You may just say, no, that's not the car that we're going to offer a discount on. However, on the flip side of that, let's just say you've got the Audi Q7, which has been around for a very long period of time and is towards the end of its production cycle. Well, Audi are offering a huge deposit contribution currently to move those vehicles because they've been out for so long. But the dealerships themselves, A, that's a high priced vehicle, and B, it may be difficult to sell as many as you need. And if someone comes in and says, I'm interested, but I'm also looking at, for example, a BMW X5, and they're offering a deal, you'd be inclined to start taking money off from your profit margin to try and get a unit sold, because someone buying a Q7 is probably going to be hard to move them into a Q5 or another car that possibly you have some incentives on and could discount further. And they've already told you they're looking at a direct competitor. So you need to be laser focused on that particular car. And it's a car you've got profit in. So why not try and negotiate a deal with them? The other reasons, there's your 2 of the 3 prongs. So one of them is to try and hit that quarterly bonus. The other is just offering genuine sort of the car's been around for quite a while, so let's offer some money off it. The other reason is that they may be willing to give a discount. Stock age, which I've touched on before a few times. So let's just say you've got a very desirable car, let's say an Audi A5 again, it's the estate, it's in all the right spec, right colour, everything else. It's been parked in the showroom, and just through, by chance, no one's bought it. No one's interested in it. Everyone keeps saying, no, that's, I don't know. They want a diesel, they want a petrol, they want a hybrid. And it's just none of the things people want. And now it's got to 80 days. And in this scenario, you have it on a 90-day interest-free period. Well, the car is about to become interest-bearing to the dealer, which means the manufacturer is going to start charging interest on the car, because all of this is borrowed money until you sell something. So the dealership is going to pay the manufacturer once they sell it, and they'll get their money, but it's financed until then. And either directly through the manufacturer, they'll have that finance agreement, or through a third party. And the third party will generally say, look, we'll be your preferred lender, so we make money that way, and we'll give you X amount of time of holding this without interest. But there is, they can't be unreasonable with that, but they'll usually say something like 90 days. If it's sticking with Audi, if it was an R8, they might give 6 months because it's a car that's, sells fewer units. And so let's just say you're quite far into that period, even though that's a desirable car. Someone comes in and they say, "Oh, I'm looking for a used A5. I haven't quite got the money for a new one. It's just a little bit out of my pocket money, unfortunately, and I just know I can't afford it." Well, let's have a sit down and a conversation. What do you think you could afford? And let's talk about this new car. I've got a used one, but let's talk about this new one. And in that time, you would be saying to your sales manager, look, they're happy with the one that's in the showroom. It's 85 days in. It's got 5 days left before it starts costing the dealership money to have it sat there, which terrifies everyone from the sales manager to the general manager to the regional manager, all the way up the chain to the CEO of the dealership group. No one wants to be paying interest because you will be paying it until the car is sold. And that could be a very long time, and all the time you're just bleeding money. So yeah, the idea that someone could buy it, very attractive. And you can go to the sales manager and say, look, they wanted to buy used. They probably haven't got the budget for this car, but what can we do? You're going to wipe all the profit out of it. So you're going to offer a big chunky discount off of it. So that's what the sales manager would be sort of in that situation. Most of the time, that's the decision they would make. Offer a huge discount. All of the profit can be removed, because at this time we're talking more about salvaging being at zero rather than in the future being at a loss. Because once it's interest bearing, you're going to be even more keen to sell it. And I've had a car. It's happened a handful of times when I sold cars where you'd get what I'm sure in the US is called hood money. We call it bonnet money, where the sales manager or the GM would say, that car and that car, there's £500 on the bonnet, or a lesser amount. Sometimes depends how desperate they are to get rid of it. And that means if you can sell that car, forget whatever the deal is and your usual commission structure, you're just going to get a bonus of 500 quid to sell it. 500 quid's probably a bit strong. 100, 200, 250 maybe would be probably the best you get. But if they were desperate, and I had it once where we were desperate for something that was on the pitch, I can't remember what it was, and the general manager, I think he said £300, it was sold that afternoon. Because all of us were trying to move it, and ultimately, there was someone who was willing to buy it with a discount from the sales manager, and of course, you've got that bonus there. So that's the other scenario where a sales manager may say, okay, so let's offer some money off because we've got an interest bearing. So from your point of view, if you wanted to get the best possible deal, and I don't think any dealer would ever tell you this when you walk in the door, but if you could find a car that has been around for a little while, maybe drive past the dealer a few times and just see if there's the same car. You probably need to find a particular aspect or feature of it, because I'm telling you, don't just say, oh, I know there's a blue one. Would swap a blue car for another blue car, exactly the same spec all day long. Bearing in mind that dealerships just hold identical cars, and several of them a lot of the time, especially if it's popular. But if you've got a Volkswagen Amarok pickup truck painted yellow, then probably is only one of them. And if you drive past the dealership and you're interested in Amarok, and you notice it's been there for a few weeks, no, it's been there for a couple of months, then that would be one way. Your next way is to have a little look on the Volkswagen website and see, are they offering any discount themselves? So let's say in our imaginary example, Volkswagen are offering £5,000 off if you finance an Amarok. You've been going past this yellow one on the dealership for over a month now, and you think, that's been there a little while. It's gonna get interest bearing at some point. So you go in, make a tentative sort of query about the car, and you see how much the salesman is desperate to move it. And then you may find that if you do that towards the end of a quarter, at the end of a month, so let's just say it's the end of June, okay? The end of June, it's the end of a quarter, so you're trying to hit the quarterly bonus, you're trying to hit a monthly bonus, you're trying to sell a car that's going to become interest-bearing, and Volkswagen are trying to shift the car with an incentive. You'd probably get everything thrown at you. That's where you'd be the person where all your friends have heard of that guy that got a crazy deal. That would be the day you got a crazy deal. It's just it's honestly the stars aligning like that, having a car that's been in stock for a while, that is coming up to, you can control, obviously, looking at the end of a quarter or the end of a month, but you don't necessarily know the business year that the dealership is working to. So not all of them are working January to March, March to June, etc., etc. Sorry, April to June. Some of them are working their own tax year or whatever else. So you can't control for knowing it's the end of the quarter, but best bet, end of March, end of June, end of September, and my favorite, end of December. End of year, end of quarter, end of month. Find a car that's been sat there for 3 months. Should get your best deal there. Right, that's the end of this one. Hopefully I've really answered the question that came through on the channel. I hope you've all enjoyed this, and next week I'll be back with Owen for another podcast, and that should be a pretty interesting one. We're going to do the generations of the Volkswagen Golf GTI. So, shall see you all in the next one, and don't forget to check out the main channel if you haven't done already.